In this video, we'll be finding the joint, marginal, and conditional relative frequencies of a two-way frequency table. So before we can begin finding these relative frequencies, we need to define what they are. Joint relative frequency, by definition, is defined as the ratio of a frequency that is not in the total row or total column to the total number of values or observations. Now, I know that sounds really confusing. What that is basically saying is anything that's not in the total row or total column. So we're going to ignore these right here. So these numbers right here, the 55, the 22, the 63, and the 12, we can find what are called joint relative frequencies of those numbers by taking each of those numbers and dividing them by the 152. And so what we're doing is we're saying, okay, say we have joint means together with, so we have sophomores and yes, they have mobile access. So we're finding that joint relative frequency. So because it's joint, we have two details there. So we're taking 55 and we're dividing it by the total of 152, which is equal to approximately 0.362. So then we can find the joint relative frequency of sophomores and no, which is right here. So we take 22 over 152. So notice that I'm taking that joint frequency, which is 22, because it has two things, divided by the total, and that gives me 0.145. Then from here, I can find the joint relative frequency of freshmen and yes, because that's two things joined together. So I would take 63 over 152, which is 0.414. And then I can find the joint relative frequency of freshmen and no, which will be found by taking 12 over 152. So we have 12 over 152, which is 0.079. So basically what's happening here is we are just taking those joint frequencies where there's two things occurring and dividing them by the total. Now often what will happen is we'll make a new table here. So we'll say that we have class and we have, the sophomores and the freshmen. So we have them there. We then have our mobile access people of yes and no. And typically what you'll see is you'll see a new type of table that has these joint relative frequencies in there. So we'll have 0.362 here, 0.145, 0.414, and 0.079. And basically what these joint relative frequencies represent is what percentage of students fall in each category. So this here, if we multiply it by 100, is saying that 36.2% of the students are sophomores that say yes, they have mobile access. This, if we multiply it by 100, it's 14.5% of students are sophomores that do not have access. Then we have 41.4% of the students are freshmen with access, and here 7.9% of the students are freshmen without access. So it's basically breaking it up into percentages so you can see what percentage of the total student body fall in each joint category. Now, the marginal relative frequency is the sum of the joint relative frequencies in each row or column. So you'll notice here that I took our joint relative frequencies from the previous slide, put them into the table so we can see those percentages there. And then our marginal relative frequencies occur if we add straight down. So if we add 0.362 plus 0.414, if we add these two straight down, what we find is we have 0.776. This marginal relative frequency tells us that 77.6% of students said yes to having mobile access. Then if we add straight down in the next category, so 0.145 plus 0.079, we find that 0.224 or 22.4% said no to having mobile access. Now, if you add those two together, what you're going to find is that equals a total of 1, which should make sense because that represents 100%. Now, from here, if we add across instead, so say we add this way, that's going to give us marginal relative frequencies for sophomores and freshmen. So here we have 0.362 plus 0.145, which is going to be 0.507, which represents 50.7% of the students are sophomores. Then we have 0.414 plus 0.079, which gives me 0.493, which is 49.3% of the students are freshmen. So when we think about these, think of joint as the joint percentages. So we're taking something with two categories in it and dividing it by the total to get that frequency, relative frequency. And then when we're finding the marginals, that's when we're adding straight down or straight across to find within a single category. So this is just focusing on yes or no to mobile access, and this is focusing on freshman or sophomore. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take the table below and we're going to make a two-way table that shows the joint and marginal relative frequencies. Now, in order to do this, the one thing I need to know beyond just the joint frequencies here are I need to know the little total box that was down here. I need to know how many total students there are. Luckily, I've got all four of those categories filled in, so I can take 124 plus 219 plus 101 plus 236 and find that we have a total of 680 students. Now, I'm going to start by finding my joint relative frequency because that one is going to help me find my marginal. So what I see here is I see that I have grades of juniors and seniors, and I have whether or not they are going to major in the medical field. So I'm going to start by making a new table over here. It's going to have their class, and then I'm going to have junior and senior. I'm going to abbreviate that a little bit to save on some space. And then from here, I'm going to do majoring in the medical field, yes or no. So major in medical. And then I am going to have my totals over here since I'm going to have those marginal relative frequencies in here. So I'll have that. So what I need to do to start is I need to calculate all of my joint relative frequencies. Now remember, joint relative frequencies takes each of these numbers that goes along with two categories and divides it by the total. So I'm going to start with junior and yes. And I'd find the joint relative frequency by taking 124 over 680. And by doing so, I find that my joint relative frequency is about 0.182. So that's telling me about 18.2% of the students are juniors who plan to be in the medical field. Then if I take the next one, which is 219, and divide that by 680. When I do that, I find that it's 0.322% of students are juniors that are planning on not majoring in the medical field. Then from here, I'm going to do seniors and yes, so I take 101 over 680. So I get 0.149. Those are the number of students that are seniors that are planning to major in the medical field. And then if I do seniors and no, I do 236 over 680. And that gives me approximately 0.347. So that's telling me that 34.7% of students are seniors who do not plan to major in the medical field. So those four in green represent my joint relative frequencies. Now, to find my marginal frequencies, I'm going to add straight down in each category and add straight across in each category so that I can find the relative frequencies for just one category. So if I take 0.182 plus 0.149, I find that 0.331 or 33.1% of students plan to major in the medical field as a yes. Then we have 0.322 plus 0.347, which gives me 0.669% of students do not plan to major in the medical field. And now if I go across, I do 0.182 plus 0.322, which gives me 0.504, which tells me 50.4% of students are juniors. And then if I add straight across, 0.149 plus 0.347, that gives me 0.496 or 49.6% of students are seniors. So just to remind you, we have our green values, which represent those joint relative frequencies. You have adjoining categories finding those percentages, and the purple here represent our marginal relative frequencies. So the final type of relative frequency that we're going to look at is called conditional relative frequency. And the conditional relative frequency we can only do for either rows or columns. We have to know which type we're doing ahead of time. But the conditional relative frequency will basically say that given a condition or given something that we know, what is the ratio of the joint frequency over the marginal frequency, or the ratio of the joint relative frequency over the marginal relative frequency for a particular situation. So, for example, say that we're given a situation where it says, given that we know that the student has mobile access. So say that we know that about the student. So we know that the student has mobile access. So we know that this category is happening. Given that the student has mobile access, that's our condition that is being met. What is the conditional relative frequency that that student is a sophomore? That's what it's saying. Given that we have mobile access, so we're in this purple column right here, what is the conditional relative frequency that that student is a sophomore. So while there's a lot of data in the table, with conditional relative frequency, you are just going to focus on that particular category given that particular condition of, yes, we have mobile access. So there are two ways to find this. One is to just focus on your original frequencies. The other is to focus on those relative frequencies with the decimals. And it doesn't matter which one we do. You're going to see we get the same answer. So here it's saying that given that we have mobile access, what is the conditional relative frequency that we are also a sophomore? So what we do to calculate this is we take the ratio of the joint frequency over the marginal frequency. So we're basically saying that there are 118 total students that have mobile access. And out of those 118 total students that have mobile access, 55 of them are sophomores. So we're just looking at the students that have mobile access, and we're finding the conditional relative frequency that these students are sophomores, given that we already know they have mobile access. So if we take 55 and we divide it by 118, we find that we get 0.466, or that's saying about 46% of students that have mobile access are also sophomores. Now, what's kind of cool is this works with our joint and marginal relative frequencies as well. We can say, okay, we know that a student has mobile access. So that's going to encompass 77% basically of the total students. And of those, 36% of those were also sophomores. So if we divide 0.362 divided by 0.776, we get the same thing. We get 0.466. So it doesn't matter which way you use. I personally think that using the original numbers is a little bit easier because we have the people that we're talking about. But if for some reason you only had access to those relative frequencies, we can use the same boxes to divide. But just remember, this is when we're given a condition. So we're given that something is true. We are given that, yes, we have mobile access. And then from there, we're told, okay, what is the conditional relative frequency that that person is a sophomore given this condition. And we take the total number of people who have that condition met divided by, in this case, the number of sophomores that we're trying to find. So let's try to tackle one problem here together. It says, you survey 400 students, that's our total, and we discover that 160 students exercise regularly. You also discover that 260 students do not eat vegetables and fruits regularly. Finally, we also find that 208 students do not eat fruits and vegetables and do not exercise regularly, which is a little bit scary. Now, it doesn't specifically tell me what my two categories are, but just from reading through that, it's looking like my two categories are exercise versus no exercise, and then fruits and veggies is a yes versus no fruits and veggies. So that's what it's looking like my categories are. Just from reading through that, those are the two different situations that I'm seeing. So here it's saying make a two-way frequency table of the situation. Then, given that a student regularly exercises, find the conditional relative frequency that he or she also eats fruits and vegetables regularly. So I'm going to start by making my table, which I'm going to put in here. This first one is going to be exercise, and I probably need a little more space, so I'm going to bring that down a little bit. So let's do exercise. So that's my first category here. I'm going to have yes, we exercise, or no, we don't exercise. So that's my first category. Then my second category is going to be another yes or no, but it's going to be for fruits and vegetables. So I'm going to do fruits and vegetables on the regular here. So here I have my chart. And then I can start filling some of this in. Now I'm going to do some of the totals on the side because I know I'm going to need those eventually. So here I start off and I notice that 400 students in total are part of this study. So here we have 400 total students. And we discover that 160 students regularly exercise. Well, that goes along with my yes column down here of 160 students exercise regularly if I just go straight across. Then from here it says you also discover that 260 students do not eat fruits and veggies regularly. So that's going to go here. And then from here, the last piece of detail that I have is I know that 208 students do not eat fruits and veggies regularly and do not exercise regularly. So that's going to be a mixture of no and no, which meet right here in this particular category. So before I can actually answer this conditional relative frequency question, I need to fill in this table and kind of use my knowledge of how two-way frequency tables work to fill this in. So first thing I notice is that these two rows straight down need to add to 400. So 400 minus 160 leaves me with 260 students that do not exercise regularly. I then know that these two boxes down here add together to be 400. And if I do 400 minus 260, I find 140 students that, yes, do eat fruits and vegetables regularly. Then I can start filling in some of these boxes. So I know that, there are two boxes here that add to 260. 260 minus 208 is going to leave me with 52 in the category of yes to fruits and veggies, but no's to exercise. I then know that there's two categories here that add to 140. So 140 minus 52 leaves me with 88 students that say yes to exercise and fruits and veggies. And then finally, I take 160 minus 88, and I find there are 72 students that say no to veggies, but they do exercise regularly. So now that I've got this table filled in, I'm actually going to move forward to answer the question that I was originally asked. It says, find the relative frequency that he or she eats fruits and veggies, given, so here's our given that we exercise regularly. So because our given is that we exercise regularly, we need to look in the yes exercise regularly column or row, which is right here. This is our yes. So this is what we're focusing on here, because this is the information that we are given. We are given that we exercise regularly, and we're trying to find the conditional relative frequency that we also eat fruits and veggies, which is this number right here. So in order to find that conditional relative frequency, we're going to take 88, which is the number of students that, yes, are eating fruits and veggies regularly in that category, and divide it by the total number of students that we know are exercising. So again, remember, we're focusing on the given column or row, and then we're looking at what we're finding the relative frequency for. So if we take 88 divided by 160, we find 0.55, or 55% of students that exercise regularly are also eating their fruits and vegetables regularly.